Charlotte Reed hit the mud face first, and for one terrible moment she thought she was going to die in her own front yard. The rain came down hard. Victor's boots stopped 3 feet from her head. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just waited, the way she'd learned to wait, small, still invisible. Then she heard hooves. Slow. Steady. Coming up the road like God had finally decided to pay attention. She turned her head. A man on horseback sat in the dark watching. If this story moves you, subscribe, stay until the very end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling for 2 hours when Ethan Walker first heard her scream. He hadn't meant to stop. He'd been riding the back road between Millhaven and his property up on the ridge, a route he took specifically because it kept him away from town, away from people, away from the particular kind of trouble that collected wherever human beings gathered in numbers. He was 50 yards past the Reed property gate when the sound reached him through the downpour, and even then his first instinct was to keep riding. He didn't. He pulled the reins. His horse, a dark roan mare named Calla, went still beneath him without being asked. There was a light burning in the front window of the Reed house. Through the curtains, shadows moved in the wrong shapes. Then something hit the wall hard enough that he could hear it from the road. A body, he thought, or something close to it. Then the front door slammed open, and she came out running, except running wasn't quite the right word because her left leg wasn't working properly, and she hit the porch steps wrong and went down hard into the mud of the yard. She made a sound when she fell, a short airless sound, not quite a cry, more like someone who'd used up all their crying a long time ago. Ethan was off his horse before he knew he'd made the decision. Victor Reed appeared in the doorway a half-second later. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, well-dressed, even now his shirt untucked, but his boots still polished. He held a leather strap doubled in his right hand. He wasn't breathing hard. That was the part that struck Ethan first. The man wasn't even breathing hard. "Charlotte." Victor's voice was flat, conversational. "Get up." She didn't move. Face down in the mud, one arm bent beneath her hair, plastered wet across her cheek. Ethan could see her ribs moving. She was breathing. That was something. "I said get up." Ethan walked through the gate. Victor saw him then. He didn't startle, just shifted his weight and looked at Ethan with the particular expression of a man who owned things and was accustomed to owning them. "Evening," Victor said. "This is private property." "I know what it is," Ethan said. He crouched down beside the woman in the mud. Up close he could see the split in her lower lip. Could see the way she was holding her left arm, not broken maybe, but close. She lifted her head and looked at him, and her eyes were dark and wide, and she flinched. Actually flinched, pulling back from him before she'd even gotten a clear look at his face. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly enough that it was only for her. "She's my wife," Victor said from the porch. "Whatever you think you're seeing, it's a family matter." Ethan didn't look up. "Can you stand, ma'am?" Charlotte Reed stared at him. She had what might have been a pretty face, still did under everything, and she was young. Younger than he'd expected. 20 maybe. 21 at the outside. She had the look of someone who'd been told so many times that there was no way out that they'd started to believe it. He'd seen that look before. It lived in him some too, in a different way. "Ma'am," he said again. "Can you stand?" "You need to walk away," Victor said, and his voice had changed, now dropped lower, taken on a particular careful weight. "You don't know this situation." "I know enough," Ethan said. He got one hand under Charlotte's good arm and helped her up slowly, letting her find her feet before he put any weight on her. She wavered, caught herself, stood barely, but stood. "Step away from my wife." Victor came down off the porch. "Sir?" Ethan straightened and turned to face him. He was not a particularly large man himself, lean and weathered, 10 years older than Victor, no longer in his prime, if he'd ever been in it. But he stood in that particular way that some men stand that way, that has nothing to do with size and everything to do with certainty. "This woman is hurt. I'm going to see to that. Then we're going to talk." "The hell we are!" Victor took 2 more steps and stopped, because Ethan's hand had moved not to his holster, not a threat exactly, just a shift of weight that made the option visible. "You're trespassing on my land and interfering with my marriage. Then I suppose you can take that up with me in the morning." Ethan turned slightly, putting himself between Victor and Charlotte without making a performance of it. When it's light and she hasn't got a split lip. The air between them held. Victor Reed was a man who controlled things through reputation, through money, through the particular power that came from being known and trusted by every judge and sheriff and banker in a 3-county radius. He had never needed to be afraid of a single man standing in his yard. But something in Ethan Walker's stillness made him recalibrate. Quietly. Invisibly. "Fine." He stepped back, smiled, and it was a real smile, almost pleasant, which was worse somehow than anger would have been. "Take her then. She'll be back by morning. She always comes back." Ethan said nothing. He got Charlotte to the gate, got her up onto Calla's back with some effort and a few sounds from her that she tried hard not to make, and then he took the reins and walked the horse up the road in the rain without looking back. He didn't need to look back. He knew the kind of man he'd just walked away from. He'd known that kind of man his whole life. His cabin sat 4 miles up the ridge, which was 4 miles of mud and wet pine and absolute dark. Charlotte didn't speak. She held the saddle horn with her right hand and kept her left arm pressed close against her side, and once when the path got rocky and Calla shifted beneath her, she made that same small airless sound she'd made when she fell, and Ethan slowed the horse and kept it slower for the rest of the walk. When they reached his cabin, he built a fire and put the kettle on and found his medicine kit, a battered tin box that had seen better decades, and set it on the table without comment. He figured she'd either let him help or she wouldn't, and pushing wasn't going to change that. She sat in the chair nearest the fire and stared at her hands. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already knew it. "Charlotte." A pause. "Charlotte Reed. Ethan Walker." He poured water into the basin, brought it, and a cloth to the table. "May I look at your arm?" She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't rush it. "It's not broken," she said finally. "I'd like to make sure of that if you'll let me." She extended her arm. He examined it carefully. The wrist was badly sprained, swollen already, but she was right that the bone was intact. He wrapped it without speaking and tied the bandage off with the automatic precision of a man who'd doctored cattle and cowboys in bad conditions for 20 years. "Thank you," she said, very quiet. "Don't mention it." He went to the fire and poured coffee, set a cup in front of her, and took the other chair with his own. Outside, the rain kept on. "He'll come looking," she said. "Yes, ma'am, he will. He'll tell people you took me." She said it with a flatness that told him she'd already run the calculations. "He's good at that, making stories. By tomorrow morning, half the county will think—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "It doesn't matter what they think." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She looked at him, then really looked for the first time without the flinching. She had dark eyes, he noticed. Serious eyes. There was something in them that hadn't been beaten out of her, yet some particular quality that Victor Reed had apparently not yet managed to extinguish, though from the look of her wrist and her lip, it wasn't for lack of trying. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "You didn't have to." He thought about that for a moment. "No," he said, "I didn't." "So why?" He looked at his coffee. "I had a sister," he said. "A long time ago. She married a man a lot like yours." He didn't say what had happened after. He didn't need to. The tense of the sentence said it for him. "I kept thinking somebody should have stopped. Somebody who knew better should have stopped and not looked away." He turned the cup in his hands. "So I stopped." Charlotte was quiet for a while. "I tried to leave," she said finally. 3 times. He found me every time. He has friends everywhere. The sheriff, the banker, the judge. He told me once that the whole county was his fence, and I was just a thing inside it." She said it without particular emotion, which was somehow the worst thing about it. "I stopped trying." "Sounds like tonight you tried again." "Tonight I just ran." She shook her head. It's different, is it? She didn't answer that. They slept or didn't sleep, and when morning came, gray and clear after the rain, Ethan saddled Calla and rode down into Millhaven to see about the shape of things. He told Charlotte to bar the door and to put the rifle he left her to some use if it came to that, and she took the rifle and held it with more familiarity than he'd expected, which was interesting. Millhaven was a town of 400 people, and one long muddy main street, and a particular collective disposition toward minding other people's business while calling it community. It also had a sheriff named Carl Pruitt, who Ethan knew by reputation, which was not a good reputation. He hadn't been inside the general store for 2 minutes before he understood what the morning's story was. Herd Walker took the Reed woman, a man named Garfield Boone was saying to the store clerk loudly enough to make sure the room heard it. Victor says she left willing enough, but Victor's too much of a gentleman to say otherwise. She's a young woman with a hot head, the clerk agreed. Victor's been patient with her. Ethan set his purchases on the counter. Mr. Walker, the clerk said, going carefully neutral. Haven't seen you down here in a while. Needed supplies. He counted out his coins. Mrs. Reed is at my cabin. She was hurt. She needed somewhere to be. Now see, that's... Garfield started. She had a split lip and a sprained wrist, Ethan said, and she was face down in the mud at 10 o'clock at night while her husband stood over her with a leather strap. That's what I saw. Anyone wants to make something different out of it, they're welcome to try. The room was quiet. Victor Reed is a good man, the clerk said carefully. He's given a lot to this town. I imagine he has, Ethan said. He picked up his supplies. Money's a useful thing for covering up what a man is. He walked out. He was halfway to his horse when Sheriff Pruitt came out of his office across the street, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of a man who wanted you to know he wasn't hurrying, even though he absolutely was. Walker. Sheriff. Pruitt was 55 and soft in the middle, but not in the eyes. He had a particular way of standing feet apart, thumbs in his belt, that was intended to communicate authority without inviting argument. Victor Reed came to see me this morning, he said. Told me you took his wife off his property against her will. She walked out of her yard on her own 2 feet. I helped her to my horse. She's a married woman. That makes her welfare a matter for her husband. If a married woman has a split lip, Ethan said, whose welfare are we talking about exactly? Pruitt's expression didn't change. There's a right way to handle domestic situations in this county, and taking another man's wife to your cabin ain't it? What's the right way then? What would you have me do? Ride past a woman lying in the mud in the rain? I'd have you mind your business. Pruitt took a step closer. Victor Reed is a respected man. He's got friends in this county that stretch all the way to Denver. You're a rancher who keeps to himself and doesn't pay much in the way of dues to this community. People's gonna draw their own conclusions about who to believe. Let them, Ethan said. I'm asking you friendly, Pruitt said. Bring Mrs. Reed back to her husband. Let this family matter get settled between the people it concerns. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. No, he said. He untied Calla and rode back up the ridge. Charlotte was sitting at the table when he returned. She'd found his coffee and made a fresh pot, which meant she'd moved around the cabin some, which meant she was hurting less than she had been. She looked up when he came in, reading his expression with the quick practiced assessment of someone who'd spent a long time learning to read a room for danger. Bad, she asked. About what I expected. He hung his hat and coat. Victor's had a busy morning. What are they saying? He sat down across from her. That I took you. That you're a woman with a hot head and he's been patient. That the whole county owes him something for what he's given it. He paused. Sheriff Pruitt asked me to bring you back. Her jaw tightened. I told him no, Ethan said. She looked at him. Something moved across her face, not quite hope, because hope had been taken out of her too many times to come easily anymore. But something in the neighborhood of it. Why? She asked. You'd be better off if you just... Miss Charlotte. He said it flat. I need you to stop asking me that question. She closed her mouth. Now. He poured himself coffee. I want you to tell me everything, from the start. Because if we're going to fix this, if there's any way to fix it, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. She was quiet for a moment, looked at her wrapped wrist, looked at the fire. Then she started talking. It came out slowly, at first haltingly, with long pauses, where she seemed to be checking something internally before she let each piece out. But it came out, all of it. The first time he'd hit her the third day of their marriage, when she'd served dinner late, because she'd been trying to make it right, not knowing the stove ran hot. The way he'd apologized after so thoroughly, so elaborately, that she'd almost believed it was the last time. How she'd learned within 2 months exactly what the rules were, and how the rules kept changing, so that no matter what she did, she was always one wrong step from the strap, or the fist, or the 3 days locked in the basement room he called her thinking place. The letters, she said. Her voice had gone flat again. He read every letter I wrote, intercepted everything from my mother. I didn't know for 6 months that she'd written to me 12 times. 12 times. I thought she'd stopped caring. She stopped. She thought I'd stopped caring. Where is your mother? Glenwood Springs. She's a schoolteacher. Charlotte looked at her hands. I haven't seen her in 11 months. Does she know what's happening? No, I think she suspects. But he's very good with people, very charming. Everyone in Glenwood Springs thinks he's a wonderful man who loves his wife very much. A short, humorless breath. He does love me. That's the part I couldn't understand for the longest time. He loves me, and he does those things. Both are true. Ethan was quiet. He has a ledger, Charlotte said suddenly. He looked at her. At the house. In his study, in the locked cabinet on the left, the one with the brass keyhole. It's not the household accounts ledger. It's a different one. I saw it once when he forgot to lock the cabinet, and I only had about 30 seconds before he came back, but I saw enough. She looked up. He's been moving money. Land titles, mostly. I don't know all the details, but there were names in there I recognized. Families in this county who lost their farms in the last 2 years. Thomas Aldrich lost his property to bank debt in the spring. The Beale family lost theirs last fall. I saw their names in that ledger, Ethan. She said his name without seeming to notice she'd used it. I saw the numbers next to them. Those weren't debt numbers. Those were purchase prices. Very low purchase prices. Ethan set his coffee down slowly. You think he's manufacturing the debt, he said. I think he's buying judges and bankers and getting men ruined on paper and then buying their land for nothing. She said it steadily. I think that ledger proves it. And I think... She stopped. What? I think that's why he can't let me go, she said. Not just... She touched the side of her face. Not just because of how he is. Because I know about the ledger. Because I know there is one. That's leverage he can't afford to lose control of. Ethan looked at her for a long time. You've been thinking about this, he said. I've had 11 months with nothing to do but think. She met his eyes. I was a school teacher's daughter. I grew up around books and numbers, and my mother taught me that knowledge was the only thing in the world you couldn't have taken away from you. Her voice cracked slightly on that, and she steadied it. She was wrong about that. Victor found ways to take most things, but he couldn't take what I already knew. Outside the morning was bright and cold, and the pines dripped with last night's rain. The ledger, Ethan said. You think you could identify it again? Know it from another? Yes. And you think it's still there? He doesn't know I saw it. He has no reason to move it. She paused. Unless he suspects now, after last night. He was angry last night, Ethan said. Angry men don't reorganize their finances. They chase. He stood moved to the window. He's going to come up here, Charlotte, today or tomorrow. He's going to bring the sheriff and some of his friends, and he's going to make it a public matter because public matters are where he's strongest. I know. So we don't wait for him here. He turned. We need to move before he does, and we need that ledger. She stared at him. You're talking about going back, she said. I'm talking about going into Millhaven and making some noise of our own before it shapes every story in this county into the one he wants told. He picked up his hat. I know a woman in town, Martha Aldrich, Thomas Aldrich's widow. She lost everything. She's got no reason to love Victor Reed and every reason to want the truth known. Charlotte was still staring at him. You barely know me, she said. No, ma'am. You don't owe me anything. No, ma'am. Then why are you... Miss Charlotte. He put on his hat. I told you to stop asking me that question. A long moment passed. Then Charlotte Reed, 20 years old, one sprained wrist and a split lip, and 11 months of silence stored up inside her, stood up from that chair and straightened her back and said, All right, what do you need me to do? And Ethan Walker, for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt something in his chest that was almost like hope. Almost. Martha Aldrich lived at the end of Birch Street in a house that had once been painted white and was now the color of an old apology. She was 62 years old and had buried a husband and a farm in the same calendar year. And when she opened the door and saw Ethan Walker standing on her porch with a young woman who had a split lip and a bandaged wrist, she didn't say a word. She just stepped back and let them in. Sit down, she said. I'll put coffee on. Martha. Ethan took his hat off. We don't have much time. Then talk while I make coffee. She moved to the stove. I figured you'd come eventually. The whole town's been buzzing since 7 this morning. Victor Reed's version is already halfway to gospel. She set the pot down hard. What's the truth? Charlotte sat at Martha's kitchen table and told it. All of it the same way she'd told it to Ethan that morning, except that telling it a second time was somehow easier and harder at once. Easier because she'd already found the shape of the words harder, because Martha Aldrich was a woman who listened with her whole face. And Charlotte had not been listened to by anyone in 11 months. Twice she had to stop. Both times Martha said nothing, just waited, and Charlotte found her footing again and kept going. When she finished, Martha was quiet for a long moment. The ledger, she said finally. Yes, ma'am. Thomas talked about that ledger. Martha set cups on the table. Before he died. He said there was something wrong with the debt numbers, that he'd paid more than what the bank was claiming he owed, but the records didn't show it. He wrote 3 letters to the county clerk, never got an answer. She poured coffee. 3 months after the last letter, the bank foreclosed. 4 months after that, Victor Reed bought the property. She looked at Charlotte steadily. For less than half what it was worth. Charlotte's hands tightened around her cup. How many families? Ethan asked. That I know of 5. That I suspect closer to 10. Martha sat down. But suspicion doesn't mean anything in this county. Victor Reed has the sheriff, the bank, and Judge Harmon all pulling the same rope. You'd need something solid, something written. The ledger's written, Charlotte said. Can you get it? The question sat in the air. Ethan looked at Charlotte. Charlotte looked at her bandaged wrist. Then she looked up, and what crossed her face was not bravery exactly. It was something quieter and more stubborn than bravery. The expression of a woman who had run out of room to keep backing up. He won't expect me to go back, she said. Not voluntarily, not today. She paused. He'll expect me to be hiding. Charlotte, Ethan said. He keeps the cabinet locked, but the key's on his watch chain. She continued, her voice very level. I've watched him unlock it 100 times. The chain is long enough that he takes it off when he sleeps and sets it on the nightstand. Another pause. He sleeps until 7. Martha looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Charlotte. Absolutely not, he said. You can't go in there, Charlotte said. He knows your face now. He'll have someone watching for you. She turned her cup carefully on the table. He won't be watching for me. He never imagined I'd come back on my own. That's exactly why it's dangerous, Ethan said. Ethan! She said his name the way his mother used to say it. Not soft, not hard, just absolutely certain. I know that house. I know every floorboard that creaks and which door sticks, and exactly how far the study window opens before the hinge makes noise. You don't know any of that." She looked at him. "I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you the plan." Martha made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh and turned it into a cough. Ethan set his jaw, looked at the ceiling, looked back at Charlotte. "If anything goes wrong," he said, "then I'll scream loud enough for you to hear it from the road," she said. "You'll be close. Close as I can get without being seen," he said. "Yes." Charlotte nodded. "Then we go tonight." The day between the plan and the execution of it was the longest day Ethan Walker could remember. He spent most of it at Martha's house because riding back to the cabin would eat time he didn't want to waste, and because Martha Aldrich turned out to be the kind of woman who knew everyone in a 3-county radius and was therefore useful in ways that kept revealing themselves throughout the afternoon. By 2 o'clock she had sent word to a man named Douglas Fry, who was a sometime deputy and a full-time dissatisfied man who had watched Carl Pruitt take handshakes from Victor Reed for 6 years and had never quite found a way to do anything about it. Fry came to Martha's back door at 3 and listened to what Ethan had to say, and then stood very still for a while looking at Charlotte. "You'd testify?" he asked her. "If it came to that, yes," she said. "It would mean standing up in front of the whole county." "Yes." She said it again the same way without any decoration on it. Fry looked at Ethan. "You trust this?" "I trust her," Ethan said. "That's enough for me." "All right." Fry pulled his coat on. "I'm not doing anything illegal, not yet. But if that ledger makes it out of that house and into the right hands, I know a federal circuit judge who owes me a very old favor, a man in Denver who doesn't eat out of Victor Reed's hand." He buttoned his coat. "Get the ledger. Don't get caught. Everything after that I can work with." He left. Charlotte had been quiet through most of it. Now she said, "A federal judge. Victor's protection is local," Ethan said. "Local judges, local sheriff, local bank." He looked at her. "Local protection doesn't help you when the federal circuit comes to town." "He never thought about that," she said slowly. "He built his walls in all the directions he could see." She paused. "He never looked up. Men like him rarely do." She turned that over. Then she went back to the window and watched the street and didn't say anything else for a long time. At 9 o'clock that night, Charlotte Reed walked back through the gate of her own house. Her heart was a fist hitting her sternum on every beat. Her breathing was deliberate in through the nose, out through the mouth, because deliberate breathing was a thing her mother had taught her when she was small and afraid of thunder, and it was the same technique she'd been using for 11 months to get through days that were worse than thunder. She kept her steps light. She knew exactly where to put her feet. The house was dark. One lamp still burning in the parlor, which meant Victor hadn't gone to bed yet, which was the first thing that went wrong. She stopped just inside the front door, stood absolutely still, and listened to the house the way you listen to a living thing. The parlor lamp threw a thin line of light under the door. She could hear breathing slow, heavy. She pressed her eye to the crack in the parlor door. Victor was asleep in his armchair. A glass of whiskey had tipped slightly in his slack hand. The bottle on the side table was 2/3 empty. He'd drunk himself to sleep, waiting for something, for news, for her return, for the pleasure of imagining what he'd do when she came back. She'd seen him like this before. The anger when he couldn't discharge it immediately sometimes turned inward and ate itself on whiskey. The watch chain was still around his vest. He hadn't gone to bed. She stood there for what felt like a full minute, but was probably 10 seconds, her mind running fast. The key was on his person. The cabinet was in the study 1 room away. She could try to lift the chain while he slept. He was a light sleeper, always had been. Or she could wait and see if he woke and went to bed on his own. She did not have that kind of time. She moved into the parlor. Every step was a calculation. Where the rug gave way to floorboard. Where the floorboard was solid. She was 3 feet from his chair when he shifted in his sleep, and she went completely motionless, a statue not even blinking, waiting for his breathing to settle back into its deep rhythm. It did. She reached for the watch chain. Charlotte. She didn't run. Running would have been the worst thing she could do. She straightened slowly instead and turned, and Victor Reed was watching her with his eyes half open and a smile on his face that made her blood go cold. He hadn't been asleep. He'd been waiting. "I knew you'd come back," he said conversationally, the way he always spoke when he was at his most dangerous. "I told Carl. I said she'll come back on her own. She always does." He sat up slowly, set the whiskey glass down on the table. "Where's your cowboy?" "I came back on my own," she said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steady for 11 months. "You were right. I have nowhere to go." He stood. "Let me see your hands." She held them out, the bandaged wrist, the other hand bare. "He wrapped it nicely," Victor said, looking at the bandage. Thoughtful man. He moved around her in a slow circle, which was something he did when he was deciding something, and she tracked him with her eyes without moving her head. "You didn't come back because you have nowhere to go, Charlotte. You're not stupid. I've always said that about you. She's not stupid." He stopped in front of her. "Why did you come back?" The truth was the only lie he'd never suspect. "Because I'm scared," she said. "I don't know that man. I don't know what he wants." She let her voice shake slightly, not too much, just the controlled, small tremor of a woman holding herself together. "I know what you want. I know your rules. I know how to—" She stopped, let her eyes drop. "At least here I know the shape of things." He watched her for a long time. "All right," he said finally. He touched her chin with 2 fingers, lifted, it studied her face. She did not pull away. "All right. Go upstairs. Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for 20 minutes, counting his footsteps below her to the study, back to the parlor, to the kitchen, back to the study. She heard the cabinet open and close. Good, she thought. He's checking. He's satisfied. He's going to bed. At 11:15, she heard him on the stairs. The bedroom door opened. He looked in without crossing the threshold. She was lying down with her eyes closed, breathing slow and even. He closed the door. At midnight exactly, she heard him begin to snore. She waited another 30 minutes before she moved. The study cabinet key was on the nightstand. She lifted it without touching the chain, just the small brass key itself slipped off the ring with the patience of a woman who had practiced patience as a survival skill. She went into the study, and she didn't use the lamp because lamplight under a door would show, and she'd always had good night vision. Her mother used to joke that she was part cat. The cabinet opened on the first try. There were 3 ledgers inside. She'd seen them before. 2 were ordinary household accounts. 1 was the other one, the one that mattered. She knew it immediately, the same way she'd known it the first time, slightly thicker, newer looking with a different kind of clasp. She took it, closed the cabinet, locked it, replaced the key. She was back in the bedroom replacing the key on the nightstand when Victor's breathing changed, not all the way to waking, just a shift in the rhythm. A man surfacing briefly from sleep. She stood still. His breathing deepened again. She walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs and out the back door and across the yard to the fence line, and when she got through the fence and into the dark of the tree line, she ran, because now she could run, because there was no more need to be small and invisible and contained. She ran with the ledger against her chest and the cold night air in her lungs, and somewhere behind her, the house that had been her prison for 11 months. And she ran until she hit the road and Ethan stepped out of the shadows, and she nearly crashed into him. "I got it," she said. She was shaking. He could feel it. She'd grabbed his arm without meaning to, and she was shaking through her whole body. "You're all right," he said. Not a question. "I'm all right." She pressed the ledger into his hands. "I'm all right. Let's go." They rode back to Martha's house, and Martha was awake and waiting, and Douglas Fry was there too, sitting at the kitchen table with his coat still on. Charlotte put the ledger on the table, and Fry opened it, and the room went very quiet. He read for 7 minutes without speaking. Then he said, "God Almighty." Martha leaned over his shoulder. Her face went through several things. "Is it enough?" Ethan asked. "Enough." Fry looked up. His voice was different now, careful, almost reverent. "This is a full record. Names, dates, amounts. Bank notes that were falsified. Property transfers that were backdated. He kept every transaction in here, everything." He stopped. "Why would a man keep records like this?" "Because he thought they were safe," Charlotte said. She was still shaking slightly, but her voice was solid. "Because he thought no one would ever see them. He kept them so he could remember what was his." She sat down. "He kept them the same reason he kept track of every rule I broke and every punishment he gave. Because possession was the thing that made him feel real." Fry looked at her. "You understood him," he said. "I lived with him," she said. "That's different from understanding him, but yes, I know how he thinks." She looked at the ledger. "That's his whole operation in there. Every family he ruined, every official he paid. He didn't think he needed to hide it because he believed nobody would ever have the courage to look." Fry closed the ledger carefully, looked at Ethan. "I need to ride to Denver. Tonight. If I leave now, I can be there by morning." He stood, picked up the ledger. "My circuit judge, if I get this to him before Victor Reed knows it's gone." He stopped. "How long do we have before he notices?" "He checks the cabinet in the morning," Charlotte said. "Early, 6:30. Fry looked at the clock on Martha's mantel. It was 10 minutes after 1 in the morning. 5 hours, he said. He was out the back door 90 seconds later. The three of them left in the kitchen. Ethan, Charlotte. Martha sat in the sudden quiet of a house from which something enormous had just departed. Martha poured more coffee. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Charlotte laughed. It came out startled and short, not quite the laugh of a happy woman, more the laugh of a woman who hadn't laughed in so long that it surprised her when it happened. She pressed her hand over her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be," Martha said. Charlotte shook her head. "I went in there, and I genuinely thought I might—" She stopped again. "And then I walked out." She looked at her hands. "I walked out with it." "Yes," Martha said. "You did." Ethan was watching her from across the table. He'd been watching her since she ran into him on the road, that particular careful attention of a man filing something away, cataloging a moment he knew was going to matter. The way you always know certain moments are going to matter, even while they're still happening. Charlotte Reed. 20 years old, bandaged wrist and split lip, sitting at a kitchen table in the early hours of the morning, with coffee going cold in front of her. And 11 months of someone else's silence, finally done. "What happens when he finds out?" she asked. The laugh was gone. She was herself again, careful, precise thinking 3 steps ahead. "When he opens the cabinet and it's gone, he'll know it was me." "Yes," Ethan said. "He'll come straight to Martha's." "Probably." "Then we shouldn't be here." She looked at Ethan. "He can't find the ledger. If he catches Fry before Fry reaches Denver—" "Fry's a good writer," Ethan said. "And he knows roads Victor doesn't know he knows." "But if—" "Charlotte," he said it quietly. "We do what we can with what we have. Fry's got the ledger and 5 hours and a score to settle. That's not nothing." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "It's not." She looked at Martha. "We need to move before 6. Is there somewhere—" "Thomas's old hunting cabin," Martha said immediately. 8 miles north. Victor doesn't know it exists. Thomas bought that land under my maiden name years ago. We were going to build on it someday." She stopped. "Someday. Can you get there?" Ethan asked Charlotte. She stood up. "Let's go find out." They were 2 miles north of town on the hunting cabin road when they heard a sound behind them that didn't belong to the night. Ethan stopped Calla. Charlotte, riding Martha's old gray gelding, pulled up beside him. "Someone's following," he said. He listened. 2, maybe 3 horses. He turned in the saddle. The road behind them was dark. He found out. "It's only 3:30, she said. "He wasn't asleep," Ethan said. "When you went downstairs, he wasn't asleep." Charlotte's face in the dark was very still. "Then he knew," she said. "He suspected." Ethan turned Calla off the road. "He let you go because he wanted to see where you'd go. He wanted to know who else was involved." He guided the horse into the trees. "Come on." She followed him without hesitation, and the sound of hoofbeats behind them grew louder. And somewhere back there, Victor Reed was riding toward the place where his wife had been 20 minutes ago, burning with the particular fury of a man who had engineered his own perfect trap and watched someone walk right out of it anyway. The ledger was 50 miles north and moving. Victor Reed didn't know that yet, but he was about to find out that some things once lost don't come back. They rode hard through the trees for 20 minutes before Ethan pulled up and listened. The hoofbeats behind them had stopped. That was almost worse than hearing them. "He's not following anymore," Charlotte said. "No." Ethan turned Calla in a slow circle, reading the dark. He stopped. "Why would he stop?" "Because he figured out where we're going." Ethan's voice was flat. "Or he figured out where we're not going and decided to cut us off somewhere else." He looked at her. "Does Victor know about Martha's hunting cabin?" "I said he didn't." "Think again. Carefully." Charlotte was quiet for 3 seconds. "Martha's maiden name is Greer. The land's registered to Eleanor Greer. Victor knows Martha's maiden name. He mentioned it once at a dinner. Something about the Greer family selling off property years ago." She stopped. "He might know." "Then that's exactly where he's going." Ethan turned the horse north anyway, which means we need to get there first and not be there when he arrives. "That doesn't make any sense." "It will." He urged Calla faster. "Keep up." She kept up. Whatever else 11 months had done to Charlotte Reed, it had not made her slow. They reached the cabin in 40 minutes, which was harder riding than either of them should have been doing in the dark, and Ethan went straight to the small storage shed out back while Charlotte held the horses. He came out with a lantern, a coil of rope, and an expression that told her he was already several steps into a plan she hadn't been told yet. "There's a ridge trail half a mile east," he said. "Runs parallel to the main road all the way to the Aldrich farmstead. From the farmstead it's 8 miles to the Denison crossing, and from the crossing you can pick up the stage road." He handed her the lantern, not lit. "If you ride the ridge trail, you come out the other side of the county before Victor knows you've moved." Charlotte stared at him. "And what are you doing?" "Staying here." "Absolutely not." "Charlotte, don't you dare." Her voice cracked, but not with weakness, with fury, which surprised even her. "Don't you bring me this far, and then tell me to ride away while you wait here for him." "Someone has to make him think we're still in the cabin," Ethan said. "Buy Fry more time. Victor finds this place empty. He'll know something changed. He'll start thinking. A thinking Victor Reed is more dangerous than an angry one." "Then I stay and you ride." "You don't know these roads in the dark." "Teach me, Charlotte." He said it with a particular kind of patience that was almost out of patience. "I need you somewhere safe, not because you can't handle yourself. I've watched you handle yourself well enough to know different. But because you are the only person in this county who can stand up in front of a federal judge and testify to what's in that ledger from personal witness. I can't do that. Martha can't do that. Only you can do that. Which means you are the single most important person in this entire situation, and you cannot afford to be in that cabin when Victor Reed rides up." She looked at him for a long moment. "You should have led with that," she said. "I know." "Fine." She took the lantern. "But Ethan, I'll be all right. You don't know that." "No," he said. "I don't." He took Calla's reins, looped them around the post. "But Victor wants to make a point. Not a body." A body is hard to explain. A man he's run off his property is easy to explain. He turned back to her. Ride east. Stay on the ridge. Don't use the lantern unless you have to. She stood there another moment, her jaw working. Then she said, "When this is done," and she said it like a woman who intended to finish that sentence sometime, just not now, and she mounted the gray and rode into the dark. Ethan watched her until he couldn't hear the hoofbeats anymore. Then he went inside the cabin, lit a single lamp, and put the coffee pot on the stove, like a man with nowhere better to be. He didn't have to wait long. Victor Reed arrived at the cabin 40 minutes later with 4 men. Ethan counted them through the window without moving the curtain. Sheriff Carl Pruitt was among them, which wasn't a surprise. The other 3 were ranch hands, the kind of men who hired themselves out for tasks that didn't get written down anywhere. Victor didn't knock. The door came open like he owned it, which in his mind he probably did, because in Victor Reed's mind, most things belonged to him by default. He stopped when he saw Ethan sitting at the table. Just Ethan, coffee cup in hand, alone. Victor looked around the cabin once quickly, and his face went through something he controlled almost fast enough to hide. Almost. "Where is she?" he said. "Good morning to you too," Ethan said. "Walker?" Victor came 2 steps into the cabin, and Pruitt and the 3 men filled the doorway behind him. "I'm going to ask you one time. Where is my wife?" "Gone." Ethan set down his cup. "Left an hour ago. Wouldn't tell me where." "You expect me to believe that?" "Believe what you like." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "She took the gray horse and rode. I figured she went back to you honestly. Seemed like something she might do." Victor was watching him the way a man watches something he's trying to find the seam in. "She took something from my house," he said. "Something that belongs to me. I want it back." What did she take? The question was simple, and Ethan asked it simply. But something moved behind Victor Reed's eyes, the specific calculation of a man deciding how much to say and arriving at not this. "That's my business," Victor said. "Seems like—" Ethan agreed. Pruitt stepped forward. "Walker, I'm going to need you to come with me. There are some questions." "Am I under arrest, Carl?" Pruitt stopped. "Am I under arrest?" Ethan asked again, the same way, without any particular heat. "Because if I am, I'd like to know the charge. And if I'm not, I'd like to drink my coffee." The silence in the room stretched. Victor Reed made a small sound. Not anger exactly, something more controlled than anger, the sound of a man recalculating. He looked at Pruitt. Pruitt looked at the floor. The 3 ranch hands looked at each other with the expressions of men who were paid for physical solutions and were not comfortable with situations that required other kinds. "We're going to find her," Victor said, turning back to Ethan. His voice had gone very quiet. "You know that." "You might," Ethan said. "And when we do, Victor." Ethan said the name without a title, without formality, just the name, flat and direct. "I've met men like you before, not many but enough. You're going to tell me some version of what happens next, and it's going to be meant to scare me, and I'm sitting here telling you ahead of time that it won't." He looked at him across the table. "She's gone. That ledger you're not telling me about is gone. And the particular kind of morning you thought you were going to have is gone." He picked up his coffee. "So you can arrest me for something I didn't do, which will cost you time you don't have. Or you can ride back to Millhaven and start thinking about what comes next. Either way, she's already outside wherever your fences reach." Victor Reed's face went absolutely still. It was the stillness of a man who has just understood something he can't ununderstand. Not rage, something colder than rage, more precise. "Who did she give it to?" he said. Ethan said nothing. "Who did she give the ledger to?" Not a question anymore. A statement being confirmed. Ethan drank his coffee. Victor looked at him for 10 long seconds. Then he turned, walked out of the cabin, and didn't look back. Pruitt scrambled after him. The 3 ranch hands followed. Ethan sat in the quiet for a moment, listening to the hoofbeats move away, then sat his cup down carefully on the table and breathed out through his nose. That he thought was the part where it got worse. He was right. By 8 in the morning, Millhaven had a new story. Ethan got the shape of it from Douglas Fry's brother Joseph, who appeared at the cabin door on foot with his hat in his hands, and an expression that said he was the bearer of news he wished he didn't have. Victor Reed had gone directly to Judge Harmon at 6:30. By 7, there was a warrant for Charlotte's arrest theft of private property abandonment of the marital home, and a third charge that Joseph described as alienation of affection, which was a legal instrument Victor had apparently prepared in advance. He had it ready, Joseph said. The warrant. Harmon signed it in his dressing gown. He had it ready before she left, Ethan said. That's what it looks like. Joseph turned his hat in his hands. There's more. Victor's put out word that the ledger is a household accounts book that Charlotte stole along with money from the household safe. He's saying she's been planning to run for months, that she's been... He stopped. Say it. He's saying she's been involved with you for months, that the two of you planned this. Joseph looked at him with genuine discomfort. People are believing it. I'm sorry. People always want to believe the version that fits the man they already know. Ethan was quiet. Does Victor know about Douglas? He asked. Does he know Douglas rode for Denver? Not yet. Douglas covered his trail well. Joseph hesitated. But Ethan, if Victor figures out there's a federal judge involved, he's got reach. He's got contacts in Denver too. Not with the circuit court maybe, but enough to slow things down. Buy himself time. How much time does he need? Just enough to get Charlotte back in that house and behind those doors, Joseph said. Once she's back there, once he can say she came home on her own, the whole thing changes shape. He'll say she was confused, hysterical, that the ledger was a misunderstanding. He met Ethan's eyes. He's done it before, not with a ledger, but he's made things disappear before. Ethan stood up. Where's Charlotte now? That's the other thing. Joseph's voice dropped. I don't know, but Victor sent men on the Ridge Road, 3 riders an hour ago. He paused. He figured out about the ridge. Ethan had his coat on before Joseph finished the sentence. The Ridge Road ran east along a limestone shelf with a drop on one side and dense pine on the other, which meant one way in and one way out. Charlotte had an hour's head start. But a woman alone on an unfamiliar road in the dark on a horse she didn't know well with a sprained wrist, the math wasn't comfortable. Ethan pushed Calla harder than he should have. He found her a mile from the Denison crossing, and his heart lurched sideways before he understood what he was looking at. She wasn't down. She wasn't hurt. She was standing in the middle of the road with the gray's reins in her hand, completely still, facing 3 men on horseback who had blocked the road ahead. He came up behind them fast enough that the rear horse spooked, and the nearest rider swung around with his hand going to his hip, and Ethan said, "Don't," in a voice that stopped the hand before it got there. 4 people went very still. Charlotte looked at him over the heads of the 3 riders. Her face said, "I'm all right." Her eyes said, "This is very bad." "Morning," Ethan said to the riders. He recognized the one in the middle, Pete Sable, who ran Victor's south pasture and was known for following orders without examining them too carefully. "Pete?" "Walker." Pete's jaw was set. "Victor wants his wife." "Victor wants a lot of things," Ethan said. "That's always been his problem." "There's a warrant," Pete said. "Legitimate, signed by Judge Harmon. She's to come back to Millhaven." "For what charge?" Pete's eyes shifted. "Theft." Charlotte made a sound. "Theft," she said. "Of my own?" "Charlotte." Ethan said it quietly. She stopped. He looked back at Pete. 3 men for a woman on a road, he said. "Victor must be worried." "He's not worried," Pete said. He sent 3 men, Ethan said. "A man who isn't worried sends one." He moved Calla forward 1 step, just one enough to make the horses ahead of him rearrange slightly. "I've got no argument with you, Pete, or your boys. You're doing a job. I understand that." He kept his voice level. "But I need you to think about something. When this is over, and it will be over sooner than Victor's planning on you, Want to be able to say you were following orders that turned out to be bad, not that you made a choice. There's a difference legally. There's a difference in how a man lives with himself after. Pete stared at him. She's going to Denison, Ethan said. She's going to take the stage road south. You can come back to Victor and say you lost us on the ridge, which is believable because the ridge is dark and we move fast. Or you can try to take her and have a conversation with a federal judge about obstruction. He paused. Douglas Fry left for Denver 4 hours ago. Think about what that means. The name landed. Pete blinked. The man on his left turned to look at him. The man on his right found something very interesting to look at on the ground. Douglas Fry, Pete repeated. Circuit judge, Ethan said. Old debt. New ledger. He watched the information move through Pete Sable's face like weather. Think, Pete. You're a practical man. 30 seconds passed. Pete Sable pulled his horse to the side of the road. The other two followed. Ethan rode through first, then Charlotte behind him, and neither of them looked back. And Pete Sable and his 2 men sat their horses in the middle of the ridge road and did absolutely nothing. And that was the first thing that had gone right all morning. They rode hard to Denison and got there by 10, and the stage south to Glenwood Springs was leaving at noon. Ethan bought 2 tickets because he wasn't sending her alone, and Charlotte didn't argue with him about it, which told him more about her state of mind than anything she'd said. She was holding herself together through pure willpower at this point. He could see it, the set of her jaw, the precise control of her breathing, the way she sat in the stage depot with her back to the wall and her eyes on the door. 11 months of hypervigilance didn't dissolve because you'd ridden away from the source of it. It stayed in the body. Your wrist, he said. It's fine. Charlotte? It hurts, she said. It's fine. He found a pharmacy 2 doors down and came back with better wrapping and a small bottle of something the pharmacist had recommended with the particular discretion of a man who understood that not all injuries came from accidents. He rewrapped the wrist in the corner of the depot, while she looked out the window at the street and said nothing. You did something extraordinary last night, he said. She looked at him. I stole a book from my own house. You went back into the thing that was hurting you, he said, with clear eyes and a plan, and you came out with exactly what you went in for, in the dark, alone. He tied off the bandage. That's not nothing. She turned back to the window. He was awake, she said quietly. When I came downstairs, he'd been waiting. I know. He let me take it. She said it slowly, as if she was still arriving at it. He wanted to see where I'd go, who I'd give it to. She paused. He thought he was smarter. He usually is, Ethan said. That's what happens when everybody lets you be the smartest man in the room for 20 years. You stop preparing for the possibility that you're not. She almost smiled. Not quite. The stage horn sounded outside 10 minutes to loading. Charlotte stood up. She was steady. Whatever she was carrying it in a way that left her hands free, which was Ethan thought about the most a person could ask. Ethan, she turned to him. What if Douglas doesn't make it to Denver? What if Victor gets there first? What if the judge won't? Then we try something else, he said. There might not be a something else. There's always something else. He picked up his hat. You taught me that last night, actually. She looked at him. I didn't teach you anything. You went back, he said. Into that house. You went back and you didn't freeze and you didn't give up and you came out the other side. He looked at her directly. That's the whole lesson, Charlotte. That's all there is. The depot door opened and a woman came in with 2 children, and the ordinary noise of the world came in with her voices. The creak of the stage outside horses and harness. And for a moment it was almost like none of it was happening, like they were just 2 people in a stage depot waiting for a ride. Then Charlotte picked up her bag and walked to the door and Ethan followed, and outside on the Denison Street, the stage was loading and the noon sun was high, and somewhere to the north, Victor Reed was burning. They were almost to the stage when Ethan felt it a prickling at the back of his neck, that he'd learned over 48 years to pay attention to. He stopped walking, turned. A rider was coming up the main street from the north. He knew the horse before he knew the man. A black quarter horse. Victor Reed had always ridden specifically because it was faster than anything. He knew the man a second later because Victor Reed sat a horse like he sat everything else, like it was already his. He hadn't lost them on the ridge. He'd known exactly where they were going, and he'd simply ridden faster. Victor brought the horse up short 20 yards from the stage. He looked at Ethan, looked at Charlotte, and then he did something that was worse than anything he could have said. He smiled slow and certain, the smile of a man who has just confirmed something he suspected. "Charlotte," he said. She had gone rigid beside Ethan. Her right hand found his arm and gripped it, and he felt the grip but didn't look at her, kept his eyes on Victor. "Step away from him," Victor said. "No," Charlotte said. It was the first time Ethan would realize later that he had heard her say that word without the small preparatory pause that preceded every difficult thing she said. No hesitation. No calculation. Just no. Victor's smile didn't waver. "There's a warrant, Charlotte. Signed and legal. You're going to come back to Millhaven, and we're going to clear all of this up properly." "Clear it up," she said. "That's what you're calling it. I'm calling it what it is." His voice was perfectly controlled, perfectly pleasant. The voice she'd heard for 11 months before the bad thing happened. "A misunderstanding. You were frightened. You made some poor choices. That's understandable." He looked at Ethan with an expression that was almost courteous. "Mr. Walker was kind enough to help you, and now it's time to go home." People on the Denison Street had stopped. Stage passengers, depot workers, a woman with a market basket. 2 men outside the barber, all of them watching with the particular frozen attention of ordinary people who have just walked into something that is not ordinary at all. Ethan stepped forward. Not toward Victor. Just forward 1 step, putting himself slightly in front of Charlotte without making a wall of himself. A statement, not a barrier. "Mrs. Reed is traveling," he said. "She is not," Victor said. "She's boarding that stage," Ethan said. "And you're going to let her because the alternative is causing a scene in a public street in a town that is not your town in front of people who are not your people, and then explaining to a federal circuit judge why you obstructed a material witness." He kept his voice low and even. "Douglas Fry reached Denver this morning, Victor. I know because Joseph told me. And Joseph knows because Fry sent word by telegraph to the Denison office an hour ago." Something moved in Victor's face. "The judge has the ledger," Ethan said. The street was completely silent. Victor Reed sat his black horse in the middle of Denison's main street, and for the first time in the 48 hours since his wife had run out of his house in the rain, something shifted behind his eyes. Not defeat, not yet, not a man like him, but the first hairline fracture in the certainty that had held him upright his whole life. "You don't know what you've started," he said, quiet now, just to Ethan. "Maybe not," Ethan said, "but she does." He didn't look back at Charlotte. She knows exactly what she started, and she started it herself, and there's not a fence you can build that'll reach what's already in motion. Victor looked at Charlotte. She looked back at him. She didn't step back. Victor Reed pulled his horse around and rode back up the street, the way he'd come. And he didn't look back either, and the watching crowd let out a collective breath that sounded like wind through a field. Charlotte stood where she was for a moment. Then she said very quietly, just to Ethan, "He'll regroup. He's not done." "No," Ethan agreed. "He's not done." "But the judge has the ledger." "The judge has the ledger." She nodded slowly, picked up her bag, looked at the stage. "My mother lives in Glenwood Springs," she said. "I haven't seen her in 11 months." "I know. I'd like to see her." "Then let's get on the stage," Ethan said. They did, and as the stage rolled south out of Denison and the town fell away behind them, and the road opened up ahead, Charlotte Reed sat with her good hand folded in her lap and her eyes on the window and the particular posture of a woman who is leaving something very heavy at the side of the road. She didn't speak for a long time. Neither did Ethan. Then she said, still looking out the window, "He said I'd come back. That morning in the street." She paused. "He said I always come back." "Yes," Ethan said. "He was wrong this time." "Yes," Ethan said. Outside the window the land opened wide and gold under the midday sun, and somewhere to the north, Victor Reed was riding back to a county where the story was about to change shape entirely. And somewhere in Denver, a federal judge was reading a ledger with a lot of names in it, and Charlotte Reed was riding toward her mother for the first time in 11 months. She was not done, not even close. But for the first time in a very long time, what came next was going to be her choice. The stage reached Glenwood Springs at 4:30 in the afternoon, and Eleanor Greer was standing on the porch of her small house on Cottonwood Lane when it pulled up because someone Martha Aldrich, probably through whatever network of women who knew things that ran quietly underneath the official structures of every western town, had sent word ahead. She came down the porch steps before Charlotte was fully off the stage, and Charlotte made a sound that Ethan had not heard from her before. Not the small, airless sound of pain. Not the controlled, careful sound of a woman managing herself, but something that came from much further down from the place where 11 months of enforced silence had been stored. And Eleanor Greer caught her daughter and held her the way mothers hold children who have come back from somewhere terrible. Which is to say, completely, and without a single word, because some moments are too large for words, and the women who understand that are the ones who know how to survive them. Ethan stood by the stage and looked at the street and gave them their time. When Eleanor finally looked up over her daughter's shoulder, she found him, and she studied him with the precise evaluating gaze of a schoolteacher who has spent 30 years determining in the first 30 seconds whether a person is telling the truth. Whatever she saw, she nodded. Once. That was enough. Eleanor's house was small and exact and full of books which told Ethan everything he needed to know about where Charlotte had come from and why she'd survived what she had. Eleanor fed them without asking if they were hungry. Cornbread and beans and coffee so strong it was almost a moral position. And while they ate, she listened to everything, the whole shape of it, without interrupting once. When Charlotte finished talking, Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The ledger is with the federal judge now." "Yes," Ethan said, "and Victor knows it. He knows Douglas Fry went to Denver. He may not know exactly what the judge has seen yet." "He'll know by tonight," Eleanor said. "A man like that has ears in Denver." She looked at Charlotte. "He's going to move fast. Whatever he's going to do, he'll do it before the judge can act officially." "What can he do?" Charlotte asked. "The ledger is there. The evidence is there. He can dispute its authenticity," Eleanor said. "He can claim it was fabricated, stolen and altered." She set down her coffee cup. "Without a witness who can speak to what was in that ledger before it left his cabinet, before it was ever in Douglas Fry's hands, a clever lawyer can muddy the water enough to slow things considerably." The table was quiet. "You need to testify," Ethan said to Charlotte. "Not eventually. Soon." "I know." Charlotte turned her cup in her hands. The bandaged wrist, the split lip still visible. "I know that." "It means going back," Eleanor said gently. "Not to him, but to the county, to the people, standing up in front of all of it." Charlotte looked at her mother. "I know what it means." "You've never been comfortable with Mama." Charlotte said it quietly. "I went back into that house alone at midnight. I stood in the bedroom and took the key off his nightstand while he was 2 feet away from me." She looked at Eleanor steadily. "I think I can stand in front of a courtroom." Eleanor looked at her daughter for a long moment. And something moved across her face, not surprise exactly, but the particular expression of a woman seeing something in someone she loves that she wasn't sure was there anymore. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I suppose you can." The telegraph from Douglas Fry arrived the next morning at 7:45, and the boy brought it to Eleanor's door because Fry had addressed it to E. Greer on Cottonwood Lane, which meant he'd anticipated where Charlotte would go, which meant Douglas Fry was a more careful man than Ethan had given him credit for. Ethan read it first because Charlotte was still asleep and he didn't want to wake her unless it was urgent. It was urgent. He woke her. She read it sitting on the edge of the bed, still in yesterday's clothes. Her hair loose around her shoulders, and her face moved through three things in quick succession. Shock, then a kind of fierce, tight satisfaction, and the particular expression of someone who has just been handed a problem she wasn't quite ready for. He convened a hearing, she said. Day after tomorrow, Ethan said. Millhaven Courthouse. Federal jurisdiction. Victor can't shop it to a friendlier judge because Fry's judge is the circuit, which means he sits above Harmon, above every local bench in 3 counties. Day after tomorrow, Charlotte repeated. That's 48 hours. She looked up at him. Victor is going to spend those 48 hours building a wall. Yes, he's going to find every person he owns in that county and make sure they're ready to say whatever he needs them to say. Yes. And I'm going to walk into that courthouse and stand up in front of all of them. She said it without the pause, without the tremor. The way she'd said no to Victor on the Denison street. You don't have to, Ethan said. Fry says the ledger alone may be sufficient. Maybe, she said. That's not enough. She stood up. I was there. I saw that cabinet. I saw the ledger before anyone else touched it. I know what was in it because I stood in that study for 30 seconds in the dark and I read enough to understand what I was looking at. She looked at him. That testimony is worth something. Victor knows it's worth something. That's why he's been so desperate to get me back. And it's not just because I know about the ledger, it's because I can explain it. In words, a jury understands. Ethan looked at her. All right, he said. Good. She put her hair up with 2 quick, efficient motions. Now, what does Victor do in 48 hours that we need to account for? And just like that, no ceremony, no hesitation, they were working. Yeah, what Victor did in 48 hours was considerable. By the time Ethan rode into Millhaven the following morning to take the temperature of the town, the new story was fully formed and had clearly been circulating since before dawn. Charlotte Reed had suffered a mental breakdown. She had become obsessed with a drifter, Ethan Walker, known to have no permanent ties to the community, a man with a history of keeping to himself in ways that suggested things best not examined. She had fabricated a document, altered it with her own hand, and given it to a known disgruntled former deputy whose personal grudge against Victor Reed was common knowledge. The ledger was a forgery. The whole affair was a tragedy of a troubled young woman who needed care, not a courtroom. Ethan heard this version 3 times before 10 in the morning. Once from Garfield Boone outside the general store. Once from the bank clerk who found a reason to be standing near him when he walked past. Once from Carl Pruitt himself, who stopped him on the street with the manner of a man delivering a courtesy warning. I'd think about whether you want to show up at that courthouse tomorrow, Pruitt said. A federal hearing is a serious thing. Makes a man a matter of public record. Good, Ethan said. Then people can see what's there. Pruitt's eyes shifted. Victor's got 3 witnesses who'll testify the ledger is a household accounts book. 2 of them are bankers. And Charlotte's got 11 months of bruises, Ethan said. And a wrist that a doctor in Glenwood Springs examined and documented yesterday. That was Eleanor's doing. She'd taken Charlotte to the town doctor the morning after they arrived, and the doctor had recorded everything with the careful thoroughness of a man who understood what he was looking at and why it might matter. You decide which tells the better story, Carl. Pruitt was quiet. You've taken money from that man, Ethan said. Not accusing, just stating. For years, looks like. You might want to think about what side of this you want to be standing on when the circuit judge asks you directly. He walked away. He was almost to his horse when he heard footsteps behind him. Quick light, a woman's footsteps, and turned to find Martha Aldrich moving toward him with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting for this exact moment. He's called in every debt, she said without preamble. Every favor, every handshake, every man he's ever done business with. The courthouse is going to be full tomorrow. I know. He's also sent a man to Glenwood Springs. Her voice dropped. A lawyer, arrived on the evening stage. He's filed a counter-petition with the county court, not the circuit, the county claiming Charlotte is mentally incompetent to testify, claiming she needs to be remanded to her husband's care for her own protection. Ethan stopped walking. "Can he do that?" he asked. "Judge Harmon signed the preliminary order an hour ago." Martha held his gaze. "It doesn't supersede the federal hearing. Fry's judge outranks Harmon completely. But if Victor can get Charlotte physically into county custody before tomorrow morning, there's an argument to be made about jurisdiction that could delay things." She paused. "A long delay. Long enough for Victor to find another way." "He'd have to get her here," Ethan said. "She's in Glenwood Springs." "He sent 2 men on the late stage," Martha said. "With Harmon's order. They'll arrive in Glenwood Springs at 9 tonight." Ethan looked at the clock above the telegraph office. It was 11:45 in the morning. He had 9 hours. He was on Calla and riding hard south inside of 4 minutes. He stopped once at the telegraph office, where he sent 2 messages. One to Douglas Fry in Denver, short and specific, counter-petition filed. "Harmon, county custody order. Need circuit court protective order by tonight." The other to a name Fry had given him, a federal marshal named Briggs, who worked out of the Denver office and occasionally traveled the circuit with the judge. Then he rode. He made Glenwood Springs in under 3 hours, which was faster than he should have been able to make it, and would cost Calla a day of rest, and he didn't slow down until he was on Cottonwood Lane and could see Eleanor's porch light. Charlotte opened the door before he reached the steps. She read his face. "What happened?" she said. He told her. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she turned and said, "Mama, we need the wagon." "Already harnessed," Eleanor said from behind her, which meant she'd heard Calla coming up the lane and drawn her own conclusions, because Eleanor Greer was that kind of woman. "The wagon won't outrun 2 men on horses," Ethan said. "We're not outrunning them," Charlotte said. She was already moving through the house, gathering things with precise efficiency: a bag, a folder of papers, a small wrapped package that turned out to be the doctor's written examination report. "We're not going to be here when they arrive, and we're not running." She stopped in front of him. "We're going to Millhaven. Tonight." Tonight. Her eyes were clear and steady. "If I'm in Millhaven in the courthouse in federal jurisdiction before those men from Harmon reach here, Victor's counter-petition is meaningless. I'm already where the federal hearing is happening. He can't transport me to county custody if I'm standing in federal court." She paused. "Right?" Ethan thought about it for half a second. "Right." "Then let's go." Eleanor put on her coat. "Mama," Charlotte started. "I'm coming," Eleanor said, in a tone that was the final word on the subject. They left Cottonwood Lane at 20 minutes past 2 in the afternoon. Eleanor driving the wagon with Charlotte beside her, Ethan on Calla alongside. They hit the main road north at a pace that was faster than comfortable and slower than desperate, and Charlotte sat straight-backed on that wagon seat and didn't look behind her once. They were 8 miles out of Glenwood Springs, with the sun dropping and the road emptying around them, when Charlotte said, "Tell me about your sister." The question came out of nowhere, or maybe not from nowhere. Maybe from the particular quality of the road and the falling light, and the fact that they were riding towards something that couldn't be undone, and Charlotte Reed had never been a woman who wasted time on small talk when there were real things to be said. Ethan rode alongside the wagon for a moment without answering. "Her name was Ada," he said finally. "She was younger than me by 6 years, married a man named Colford when she was 19. I was working cattle in Wyoming at the time. Didn't come home for 2 years. He kept his voice even. "When I came home, she was different, quieter. She had this way of moving around him, this radius. Like there was a zone around him that she was always calculating." Charlotte said nothing. "I saw it and I told myself it was none of my business," he said. "She hadn't asked for help. He hadn't done anything I could point to directly. People would have said I was interfering in a marriage." He looked at the road. "I left again. Wyoming, then Colorado. Kept moving." "And Ada?" Charlotte asked. "She died 3 years later," he said. "Winter of '78. They said it was a fall on the ice, down the porch steps. He was quiet for a moment. The porch steps at their house ran east to west. In January, the east side gets ice. The west side doesn't because of how the sun hits it. Ada had lived in that house for 3 years. She knew which side was safe. He didn't say what that meant. He didn't need. Charlotte reached across and put her hand briefly on his forearm, just for a second. Then she took it back and folded her hands in her lap. "You couldn't have known," she said. "I did know," he said. "That's the thing. I knew, and I looked away because it was easier." He glanced at her. "I'm not telling you this because I want credit for what I'm doing now. I'm telling you because you keep asking me why, and that's the real answer. I owe a debt I can't pay to the right person, so I'm paying it to whoever's in front of me that needs it paid." Eleanor, who had been listening in the particular way that mothers listen when they're pretending not to, said quietly from the wagon seat, "That's called grace, Mr. Walker. Most men never find it." Ethan didn't respond to that, but Charlotte noticed that his jaw unclenched slightly, and that was enough. They were 4 miles from Millhaven when the riders appeared behind them. Not the 2 men from Glenwood Springs. They wouldn't have made it this far this fast. These were different men, and there were 4 of them, and they'd clearly come from the north from Millhaven, riding south, to meet them on the road. Ethan moved Calla to block the rear of the wagon without being asked. The 4 riders pulled up ahead, blocking the road. Ethan recognized one Frank Sable, Pete's older brother, who ran Victor's north pasture and had considerably less of Pete's residual conscience. "Mrs. Reed," Frank said, "you're to come with us." "On whose authority?" Ethan asked. "Judge Harmon's." Frank produced a folded paper. "County custody order. Mrs. Reed is remanded to her husband's care pending psychiatric evaluation." "That order applies in county jurisdiction," Ethan said. "We're on the federal road, and Mrs. Reed has been summoned to a federal hearing tomorrow morning." He didn't have the paperwork on him to prove that second point. He was gambling that Frank Sable didn't know that. Frank looked uncertain, exactly as uncertain as a man who'd been handed a piece of paper and told what it meant without being told what it didn't mean. "Frank," Charlotte said. She leaned forward from the wagon seat and spoke directly to him. "You were at the Aldrich Farm social 3 years ago. Thomas Aldrich gave a toast and called Victor Reed his dearest business partner." She held Frank's gaze. "Thomas Aldrich is dead, and his widow is sleeping in a house she doesn't own anymore because Victor Reed manufactured a debt to steal it. That is in the ledger that is currently in front of a federal judge in Denver." She paused. "How much did Victor promise you to be on this road tonight?" Frank's jaw worked. "Whatever it was," she said, "it's not going to be worth what comes after. The circuit judge has jurisdiction over every man named in that ledger, and everyone who acted on Victor's behalf. That includes men who blocked a federal witness on a road." A long silence. One of the men behind Frank said quietly, "Frank, I didn't sign up for federal." "Enough," Frank said. He looked at Charlotte, then at Ethan, then at the road ahead. Something shifted in his face, the specific expression of a man deciding that the thing he was asked to do has become more expensive than the thing he was paid for it. He pulled his horse to the side. The others followed. Ethan kept his eyes on them until the wagon was fully passed. Then he rode alongside it without looking back. "You're better at that than I am," he said to Charlotte. "I grew up watching my mother talk to difficult parents," she said. "You learn fast what actually moves people and what doesn't. What moves them? Consequences they haven't calculated yet," she said. "Victor always thought he was the only one doing the calculating. He never figured out that the people around him were thinking too. He treated them like furniture." She looked ahead at the first lights of Millhaven appearing in the dark. "Furniture doesn't testify. People do."
Dalibago.
They reached Millhaven at 9:47 in the evening and went directly to the courthouse where Douglas Fry was waiting on the front steps with a tall man in a dark coat whom Ethan had not met before. "Briggs," the tall man said, extending his hand. "Federal Marshal. I rode down with the circuit judge this afternoon." He looked at Charlotte. "Mrs. Reed, you're under federal court protection as of..." He checked his watch, 18 minutes ago. Judge signed the protective order in response to your telegraph. He looked at Ethan. Good instinct on that message. Her instinct, Ethan said. I just rode fast. Briggs nodded. The hearing is at 8 tomorrow morning. I'll have 2 deputies on the courthouse doors from now until it's done. He glanced down the dark street. Victor Reed has a lot of friends in this town. He does, Charlotte said. You're not afraid of that. She looked at him. I'm afraid of a lot of things, Marshal. I've been afraid for 11 months straight. She met his eyes. But I'm here. Briggs studied her for a moment, with the evaluating look of a man who spent his professional life assessing whether people would hold up under pressure. Then he said, Yes, ma'am, you are. Eleanor took Charlotte's arm, and they went inside, and Ethan stayed on the courthouse steps for a moment, with Fry looking at the dark street. How many does he have? Ethan asked. Witnesses. Maybe 8, Fry said. 2 bankers, 3 business associates Pruitt, and 2 men who claim they'll testify the ledger was altered. He paused. But the judge has already reviewed the ledger himself. He's seen the dates, the paper, the ink consistency. He brought a man from Denver who examines documents professionally. Fry turned to look at him. The forgery claim won't hold. The ledger is real, and it's consistent, and Victor Reed kept it in his own hand. Then why does he still think he can win? Ethan asked. Fry was quiet for a moment. Because he's never lost before, he said. Not once, not in 20 years. He doesn't have a mental model for what losing looks like. He looked at the courthouse door where Charlotte had gone inside. That woman in there does, though. She knows exactly what losing looks like. Lived with it every day for 11 months. He paused. That's why she's going to win. Ethan didn't say anything to that. But he thought about Ada and the porch steps and the particular debt that had no proper recipient, and he thought that maybe Fry was right. Inside the courthouse, Charlotte Reed sat at a long table under federal protection with her mother beside her and a stack of documented medical evidence in front of her, and a statement she had spent the last hour composing in Eleanor's careful schoolteacher's handwriting. Every date, every incident, every name from the ledger she'd memorized in 30 seconds in a dark study. Outside Millhaven murmured and shifted and prepared for morning. Victor Reed was in his house on the hill, and for the first time in 20 years he was making plans he wasn't certain would work, which was a new sensation, and it sat in him like something cold. The night passed. Nobody slept much, and at 7:58 in the morning, Charlotte Reed walked through the doors of the Millhaven courthouse and took her seat, and the room was full of people who had known her as Victor's wife and property, and she looked at none of them because she was not there for them. She was there for herself, and for Ada, who never got the chance, and for every woman in every county whose name was in that ledger, or should have been, who had been told in 100 different ways that the walls around her were permanent, that the man who built them was too powerful, that nobody was coming. Charlotte Reed had come. She folded her hands on the table, and the judge called the hearing to order, and she did not look away. The judge's name was Harold Crane, and he had been riding the federal circuit for 19 years, which meant he had seen every variety of powerful man attempt to make a courtroom perform the way a courtroom performed when powerful men controlled it. He was 61 years old, and had the particular quality of stillness that belonged to men who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. And when he called the hearing to order at 8 o'clock sharp, the room went quiet. In the way rooms went quiet when the authority in them was genuine rather than purchased. Victor Reed sat at the table to Charlotte's left with 2 lawyers flanking him and Carl Pruitt directly behind him in the first row of seats. He was dressed carefully, dark suit, clean shave, the appearance of a reasonable man attending to a reasonable matter. He had not looked at Charlotte since she sat down. That was deliberate, she knew. Looking at her would acknowledge that she was something worth looking at. She kept her eyes on Judge Crane. Douglas Fry sat to her right, not as her attorney. She had no attorney, a fact that Victor's lead lawyer had already noted with barely concealed satisfaction, but as the man who had brought the case to the federal court, and who would present the ledger as evidence. Marshal Briggs stood near the door with two deputies, whose presence said plainly that this room was operating under different rules than the ones Millhaven was accustomed to. Eleanor sat in the second row directly behind Charlotte. She had not touched her daughter this morning, had not offered reassurance or squeezed her hand, or done any of the maternal things that would have suggested Charlotte needed shoring up. She sat straight and watched her daughter's back with the ex-woman who had raised someone she trusted completely. Ethan was at the far end of the second row. Charlotte had not looked at him either. She didn't need to. Judge Crane opened the ledger on the table in front of him. He had read it twice already, once the night before, once this morning, and his document examiner, a thin, precise man named Alderton, who had traveled from Denver, had spent 4 hours with it the previous evening. Crane folded his hands. "Mr. Fry," he said, "you may present." Fry presented for 22 minutes, and he was good, clear, specific, moving through the ledger entries one by one with the methodical patience of a man who understood that the truth didn't need to be dramatic. It only needed to be visible. He named the families. He named the dates. He named the amounts what the banks had claimed was owed, what the records showed had actually been paid, the gap between those two numbers where Victor Reed had built his fortune. Thomas Aldrich, the Beale family, the Connors, the Websters. 4 more names that Charlotte hadn't seen, but Fry had found by cross-referencing county property records with the ledger entries. 11 families total, over 6 years. Victor's lead lawyer, a Denver man named Carver, objected 3 times. Crane overruled him 3 times with the same brief patience. Then Carver stood for his presentation, and Charlotte understood immediately how Victor had chosen him. He was smooth in a way that felt like reasonableness. Each sentence shaped to sound like common sense, even when it was carrying something else entirely. The ledger was a household document, misappropriated and altered by a disturbed young woman acting under the influence of a man with unknown motives. The entries Fry had cited were standard business transactions, complex ones that required context a layperson could easily misread. Mrs. Reed had no formal education in accounting or finance. Charlotte's jaw tightened. Carver went on. Mrs. Reed had a documented history of emotional instability. There was the matter of her leaving the marital home without cause. There was the matter of her traveling alone with a man who was not her husband. There were witnesses prepared to testify to her state of mind over the preceding months. Crane listened to all of it without expression. Then he said, "Mr. Carver, is Mrs. Reed represented by counsel?" "She is not, Your Honor." "Is that because she couldn't find counsel, or because she chose to speak for herself?" A beat. Carver said, I believe she—" "Mrs. Reed," Crane said, looking past Carver directly at Charlotte. "Would you like to address this court?" She stood. The room shifted when she stood. Not loudly, no one spoke, but she felt it, the collective recalibration of a room full of people who had known her as Victor Reed's wife, as the young woman with the hot head, as the poor, troubled creature who'd run off with a drifter. They were looking at her now with the uncertain eyes of people whose story was about to change shape and who didn't yet know whether to resist it. She didn't look at any of them. She looked at Judge Crane. "Your Honor," she said, "Mr. Carver said I have no formal education in accounting or finance. That's true." She kept her voice level and clear the way her mother had taught her project, from the chest, breathe from the belly, let the words carry their own weight. "My mother is a school teacher. I grew up in a house full of books, and I was taught from the time I could read that numbers told stories the same way words did, and that the most important skill a person could develop was the ability to read what was actually written, rather than what someone wanted you to see." She paused one beat. "I can tell you exactly what is written in that ledger, because I read it. I can tell you what it means because I understand what I read. And I can tell you that what Mr. Carver is calling a complex business transaction is in plain language a theft conducted through paperwork." Carver was on his feet. "Your Honor." "Sit down, Mr. Carver," Crane said. Carver sat. Charlotte continued. She went through the ledger the way she'd gone through it in her mind 100 times since that 30 seconds in the dark study. The structure of the entries, the pattern that repeated across every family, the specific mechanism by which Victor had worked with the bank to inflate claimed debt, trigger foreclosure, and purchase at a fraction of value. She used the actual numbers. She used the actual names. She described the cross-referencing that would prove the manipulation, which county records would contradict which ledger entries, and where the discrepancies lived. By the time she finished, the room was absolutely silent. Crane looked at her for a moment. "How long did you have access to this ledger, Mrs. Reed?" "Approximately 30 seconds, she said. "Once 11 months ago." Someone in the room made a sound. Crane didn't look for who it was. "You memorized this from 30 seconds of reading," he said, not skeptical, just clarifying. "My mother taught me to read carefully," Charlotte said. "I read carefully." Crane turned to Alderton, his document examiner. "Your findings?" Alderton stood. "The ledger is authentic. The paper is consistent with documentation from the past 7 years. The ink shows appropriate aging throughout with no evidence of recent addition or alteration. The handwriting is consistent across all entries and matches samples of Mr. Reed's signature provided by the county clerk." He sat back down. Carver stood again. "Your Honor, the examiner's conclusions are based on 19 years of professional practice," Crane said. "Thank you, Mr. Carver. I have what I need from you." Victor Reed, for the first time that morning, moved in his chair. What happened next was the thing nobody in Millhaven had planned for, which was the arrival at 8:53 in the morning of Martha Aldrich. She came through the courthouse door with the particular momentum of a woman who has been waiting for a specific moment for a long time and will not be stopped now that it has arrived. Briggs stepped toward her and she handed him a folded document and said, "Federal subpoena. Douglas Fry arranged it last night. I am a material witness." Briggs read the document, stepped aside. Martha walked to the front of the room and looked at Judge Crane. "Your Honor, I have a statement, and I have something else." She reached into her coat and produced a small bundle of papers. 11 letters, written to the county clerk, the state banking commissioner, and the governor's office over the past 3 years by my late husband, Thomas Aldrich, documenting irregularities in his debt calculation that he could not get anyone to investigate. She set the bundle on the judge's table. Nobody answered him, not once. The room was so quiet that Charlotte could hear the man behind her breathing. Victor's lawyer said, "Your Honor, this witness was not on the—" "She has a federal subpoena, Mr. Carver," Crane said, picking up the letters. "She's on the list now." Martha testified for 18 minutes. She was not dramatic about it. She was a 62-year-old widow who had lost her husband and her farm and had spent 3 years trying to find someone in the official structure of her county who would listen, and she described all of that in the plain, careful language of a woman who had moved past grief into something harder and more durable than grief. When she finished, Victor Reed's second lawyer leaned in and said something into Carver's ear, and Carver's expression shifted in a way that Charlotte recognized the expression of a lawyer who is recalculating his fee against his reputation. Then the door opened again. Pete Sable came in, which nobody expected, least of all Victor Reed. Pete was not a material witness. Pete did not have a subpoena. Pete Sable walked through that courthouse door in his ranch work clothes, with his hat in his hands, and said to Marshal Briggs, "I need to make a statement. I was asked to block a federal witness on a public road 2 nights ago. I moved aside, but I was asked, and the man who asked me was Victor Reed, and I'll say that under oath." Briggs looked at Crane. Crane nodded. Pete Sable sat down in the witness chair and told a short, specific, honest story about a night on the Ridge Road, and a man on a black horse who had paid him to be there, and he told it with the uncomfortable directness of someone who was not accustomed to this kind of honesty, and found it harder than expected, and that difficulty was itself convincing. Victor's second lawyer closed his folder. Carver said nothing. Victor Reed sat at his table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him, and his face arranged in the careful, neutral expression of a man who is trying to decide whether there is still a move available to him. Charlotte watched him do the calculation and watched him arrive at the answer. There wasn't. Crane called a 30-minute recess. Ethan found Charlotte in the hallway, standing near the window, with her arms folded and her eyes on the middle distance. Eleanor was beside her, close but not touching. "You all right?" Ethan asked. "Yes." She said it immediately, then reconsidered. "No, I don't know." She unfolded her arms. "Pete Sable." "I know." "That." "Neither did Victor," Ethan said. She looked at him. "Do you think it's enough?" "I think Crane had enough before Pete walked in," Ethan said. "Pete just made it unambiguous." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Carver's going to try to negotiate," she said. "Before they go back in, he's going to go to Victor and tell him that the best remaining option is some kind of agreement. Victor pays restitution, pleads to lesser charges, keeps some portion of what he has. Fry won't accept that. No, but the judge might push for it. It's cleaner. It's faster." She looked at her hands. "Victor would still walk away with something." "Charlotte?" Ethan waited until she looked up at him. "Whatever Crane decides in that room, the ledger is real. The testimony is real. The letters Martha brought are real. Victor Reed built his whole operation on the assumption that the truth would never be visible because he controlled who got to look." He held her gaze. "You made it visible. Whatever form the consequence takes, that part's already done. You already did that." She looked at him for a long moment. "I want him to lose everything," she said. "I know that's not a generous thing to feel." "It's an honest thing," Eleanor said quietly from beside her. "It's exactly the right thing," Ethan said. "Gian." Crane did not negotiate. When the recess ended and the room reassembled, he spoke for 4 minutes, which was not long for a judgment that was going to change the shape of a county. But Crane was not a man who needed many words. The ledger was authenticated and entered into federal record. The transactions documented therein constituted fraud, conspiracy, and willful manipulation of public banking records. Victor Reed was remanded into federal custody pending formal charges. Carl Pruitt, named in 2 ledger entries as a paid participant, was suspended from his position, effective immediately pending investigation. Judge Harmon's county court orders, the psychiatric petition, the custody warrant were voided in their entirety, as they had been issued by a court whose presiding judge was himself a subject of investigation. Crane looked at Victor Reed. "Mr. Reed," he said, "you will have the opportunity to respond to these findings through proper legal process. That opportunity will be provided fully and fairly." He paused. "It is my observation that you have not extended similar fairness to the people whose names appear in this record. The court notes that." Victor Reed said nothing. Marshal Briggs crossed the room, and Victor stood slowly controlled, maintaining the posture of a man who had not been defeated. And he turned, and he looked at Charlotte for the first time that morning. She looked back at him. She didn't look away, didn't soften her face or harden it. Just looked the way you look at something that used to be enormous and has revealed itself to be ordinary. Victor Reed opened his mouth. Briggs said quietly, "Sir." Victor closed his mouth, and Marshal Briggs walked him out of the Millhaven courthouse, and the room breathed, and Martha Aldrich reached forward from her seat and put her hand briefly on Charlotte's shoulder, and somebody near the back said something that might have been amen. And Eleanor Greer sat in the second row, with her hands folded in her lap and tears running quietly down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. The town took 3 days to finish reacting, which was about average for a town of 400 people absorbing something that upended 20 years of assumed reality. There was anger, because there always is when a powerful man falls, and people have to reckon with how much of themselves they built on the foundation he provided. There was relief, quieter and less public. There were the families, the Aldriches and the Beals and the Connors, and the others who came forward in the days after the hearing with the tentative, careful manner of people who have been told repeatedly that their experience doesn't count and are not yet sure whether that's changed. It had changed. Charlotte made sure of it. She spent those 3 days at Martha's house, and the families came to Martha's kitchen table, and Charlotte sat with them one by one, and helped them document what had been done, and what they were owed in the same plain accountable language she'd used in the courtroom. Because she understood that the federal hearing had been the visible thing, and this was the real work. Ethan stayed in Millhaven through those 3 days, because leaving felt wrong, and because Charlotte asked him to without quite asking. She said, "You don't have to stay," in a way that meant the opposite, and he understood the opposite. On the evening of the 3rd day, Carl Pruitt came to Martha's front door. He stood on the porch with his badge in his hand and asked for Charlotte, and when she came to the door he said, "I want to apologize to you, Mrs. Reed. I knew what he was doing to you. I've known for a long time. I made a choice, and I made it for the wrong reasons, and I'm sorry." He held out the badge. "I turned this into Briggs this morning, officially." Charlotte looked into the badge, looked at Pruitt. He was 55 years old and standing on a porch having the hardest conversation of his life, and she could see that it was hard, and she could also see that it was genuine. "I hear you," she said. She didn't say "I forgive you," because forgiveness was hers to give on her own timeline, and she wasn't there yet. But she heard him, and she said so, and that was enough for now. Pruitt nodded, put his hat on, walked away down the street. Martha, who had been listening from the hallway, said, "That's more than I expected from him." "People do more than you expect," Charlotte said, "when there's finally no other choice." She paused. "And sometimes, when there is." On the 4th morning, Ethan saddled Calla. He was in front of Martha's barn when Charlotte came out, and he knew by the sound of her footsteps that she'd seen him from the window and come down deliberately, which meant this conversation had been coming since the hearing, and they'd both been navigating around it. "You're going," she said. "Got cattle that need tending," he said. "Been gone nearly a week." She stood with her arms folded, not against him, just the posture of a woman collecting herself. "Will you come back to Millhaven?" "I come through town sometimes, supplies." "That's not what I asked." He turned from the saddle, looked at her directly. "Charlotte." "I know," she said. "I know you're not. I'm not asking for something you can't give. I just want to know if I'll see you again." "Yes," he said. "You'll see me again." She nodded, unfolded her arms. "I'm going to stay in Glenwood Springs for a while, with my mother. Help her with the school." She paused. "And then I think I want to start something of my own, out here. The families who lost their land, some of them can't go back. The legal process will take too long. But there are other places, other land." She looked at the street. "I want to help them find it. Help them file properly, understand their rights, keep records that can't be manipulated." She glanced back at him. "My mother taught me to read numbers the same way she taught me to read words. I've been thinking I should actually use that." Ethan looked at her. "That's a big thing," he said. "That'll make enemies." "I know," she said. "I've had enemies. It turns out I can manage." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, because Ethan Walker didn't produce expressions on a short timeline. But something in the neighborhood of one and closer than Charlotte had seen before. "You need anything," he said. "Any kind of trouble." "I know where you live," she said. He put his foot in the stirrup. "Ethan!" She said his name the same way she'd been saying it since the first morning in the cabin, certain without decoration. "What you did, stopping on that road." She held his gaze. "Most men don't." "You would have found another way," he said, "if I hadn't." "Maybe," she said. "But I didn't have to." She paused. "That matters. It matters that somebody stopped." He was quiet for a moment. Thought about Ada. The porch steps. The debt that had no proper recipient except that it did now, because the woman standing in front of him had taken what was given and turned it into something that would outlast both of them. "You're going to be all right," he said. Not a reassurance. A statement of fact, the way you state things you know. "Yes," Charlotte said. "I am." He turned Calla north and rode, and Charlotte watched him go. And she didn't feel the hollow thing she'd expected to feel, because what he'd given her wasn't the kind of thing that left when a person left. It was already part of the structure of her. Had been, since a dark road and a stranger's voice saying, I'm not going to hurt you, and her own desperate, inexperienced decision to believe him. Eleanor came to stand beside her on the street. "Good man," Eleanor said. "Yes," Charlotte said. "Lonely one?" "I know." Charlotte watched the road where he'd gone. "He'll figure it out. He's stubborn enough." Eleanor made a sound that was almost a laugh. "And you? What do you figure out next?" Charlotte turned away from the road. Stood in the morning in the town that had spent 11 months as her enemy, and would now slowly become something else, not quite home, but the place where the work was, which was close enough. "Everything," she said, and she meant it. The legal process ran another 4 months. Victor Reed was convicted on 11 counts of fraud conspiracy and falsification of public records. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, which was longer than his lawyers had expected, and shorter than Martha Aldrich thought was sufficient. And Martha said so out loud in the courtroom when the sentence was delivered, and Judge Crane gave her a look that suggested he privately agreed. Carl Pruitt's cooperation with the federal investigation earned him a reduced charge and a permanent bar from public office, which he accepted without complaint. Judge Harmon resigned before charges were filed and moved to Kansas, and nobody sent him a farewell. The families began this process of reclaiming what had been taken. It was slow. It was imperfect. Some land could not be returned because it had already passed through too many hands in the years of Victor's operation. But the federal record was clear, and the restitution process was real, and Charlotte Reed was at Martha Aldrich's kitchen table, for most of it documenting cross-referencing, writing the letters that actually got answered, because they were sent from a woman who now had the kind of knowledge that made people listen. She started a small practice in Glenwood Springs the following spring. Not a law office. She was not a lawyer. A documentation service. She helped families understand their land records, their debt instruments, their rights under the state banking code. She helped them keep the kind of records that couldn't be twisted later. She learned more in that first year of practice than she had in any year before, because real work teaches faster than anything else, and Charlotte Reed had always been a fast learner. Eleanor taught her school in the mornings and sat across from her daughter in the evenings, and sometimes they talked about Victor and sometimes they didn't. And gradually, the space he'd occupied in Charlotte's daily thinking, the constant low-level calculation of where he was and what he wanted, and what she needed to do to be safe, filled up with other things, better things, things she'd chosen. Ethan Walker came through Glenwood Springs twice that year, once in April and once in October. In April, he stayed one evening, and they ate dinner at Eleanor's table and talked about the land cases and the families and the work. And he told her that Pete Sable had been appointed interim sheriff of Millhaven, pending a proper election, which made her laugh out loud for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember. In October, he stayed 2 evenings, and the second evening, they sat on Eleanor's porch after dark, and said less, and were quieter and more comfortable in the silence than they'd been in the spring, which meant something, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said it yet, because they were both people who took their time with important things. What had happened between them was not the kind of thing that needed to be rushed. It had been built in mud and rain and dark roads and the particular pressure of terrible circumstances, and what that kind of building produced was solid all the way through. It didn't require rushing. It would still be there. And 1 year to the week after a rainy night on a Colorado road, Charlotte Reed stood in front of a room full of women in Glenwood Springs, wives and daughters and widows and schoolteachers, and she told them what she knew. About land records, about debt instruments, about the specific mechanisms by which powerful men stole from people who didn't know what to look for. She told them without drama in plain language, the way her mother had always taught her, because knowledge was the only thing in the world that genuinely could not be taken from you once you had it, and she was done letting anyone take what was hers. She had walked out of the house in the rain with nothing but what she carried in herself. It turned out that was more than enough.